Today is World Obesity Day, and welcome to the Big Picture podcast. I'm Anna Meadows. I'm Head of Behavioural Science for Healthcare at Ipsos in the UK. Anti-obesity medications have been game changers for many people living with obesity. Today's conversation isn't about whether these treatments work. It's about whether we've built the behavioural scaffolding needed to make weight loss sustainable once treatment stops. I'm delighted to be joined by Naveed Sattar. Naveed is Professor of Metabolic Medicine at the University of Glasgow, an honorary consultant at Glasgow Royal Infirmary. His work spans obesity, cardiometabolic risk, and the real-world implications of these therapies. So welcome, Naveed, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, hi Anna. Pleasure to be here.
So Naveed, is it fair to say that we've built very strong on-ramps to anti-obesity medications, but almost no structured off-ramps?
I think it is partly fair, but that's partly because these drugs have only been in the market for the last 3 or 4 years. So actually, we are learning new things about these drugs nearly, almost every week. It seems to be, multiple trials, more data, more observational data, and so we're learning as we go along. When we did those first trials, my colleagues did those first trials, the STEP trial with semaglutide and then the SURMOUNT trials with tirzepatide, and we saw the rate of weight loss and the degree of weight loss. I think we were surprised, and then obviously we've now realised that these drugs are also not harming the cardiovascular system. If anything, they're benefiting them, and therefore they're now licensed for the whole community. And as you nicely said, actually, they do work in terms of weight loss to a considerable degree. But at the same time, I think it's kind of clear that for the vast majority of people, when you do stop the drugs, yes, they'll put weight back on. Maybe not everybody. And I think that the trick, there are a number of issues around that. Number one, why are more and more people living with obesity nowadays than they were in the past? Well, it's the environment, the food environment and the activity environment is substantially changed. So if we look at, for example, as I walk down even one of my high streets here in a reasonably affluent part of Glasgow, every second or third shop is seducing me or enticing me to overeat. I'm now sitting in front of a computer. There's far less manual jobs, there's far more sedentary jobs. So the world has changed in a substantial way. That means it seduced more and more people to eat more than their bodies needs and burn less calories than they would wish to do so. And that's the problem. So when you stop these drugs, whatever happens in the brain, you return back to the same level of food noise or your baseline genetic potential to overeat. The environment's still the same. Guess what? You're going to go and overeat again. What may change for some people is, of course, we know that there's a huge gradient in obesity by social economic status, by lifestyle. What we can try and help people is when they're on the drug, and this is my hope, and I might be too optimistic here, is when people are on this drug, when they have a little bit more control over their diet, that we can then use that time and space to help them improve and give them the self-efficacy to try different diets and to try and gain physical activity in a way that they never did before. Because remember, many less well-off people have never been endowed with playing hockey or running or going skiing or, that's never going to happen to them. But even if we can get them to perhaps walk a bit more, cycle, swim, whatever's available in their locality, develop more walking groups. But I think that feeds back to, Anna, I think we need to actually, as a whole society, take what the drugs are doing, help provide that as an opportunity to help people to improve their lives a little bit. But I'm only talking about 10 to 15% because I don't think we can get them to be in a position where if they come off the drugs, they're going to stay weight stable. That isn't going to happen. It may happen for maybe 5 to 10%. Those 5-10% who are perhaps younger or who have a greater plasticity to change their lifestyle in such a meaningful way, become much more physically active, improve their diets in such a profound way. But that's a tiny number. I think most people will need the drug chronically, either at the same dose or a lower dose. Some might need it intermittently, perhaps at the same dose or a lower dose, perhaps over the winter months and not the summer months. I don't know. All of these sort of weight maintenance and journeys we need to now discover. And I think we need more trials in this specific area.
So are you suggesting there's almost a window of opportunity whilst people are taking whichever medication to try and achieve some sort of behavioural change? And what sort of things do you think are trainable? Trainable is probably not the right word, but what change is realistic during that time period of, I don't know, was it 9 months typically somebody might be taking a treatment for initially?
The way we've done this in the past, because we've always done it for, it's like, listen, get your lifestyle sorted. If you're able to lose, a few percent of weight, this is about 10 years ago, then we might think about some other treatment because it's shown to, you can do something. That's kind of wrong. For some people, where they live, their environment, their potential genetics and food noise might be so strong that they can't do that. But suddenly you give them this drug. It provides suddenly a space that they're not thinking about food all the time. They have the cycle, sort of mental capacity to think about other things. Oh wow, I can resist those cravings now. I've got time to think about something else. Can we then bolster on top of that or capitalise in that new steady state? Can we help them deal with psychosocial issues that they never dealt with that's contributed to obesity? Can we help them deal with their sleep issues, which have been a problem that's contributing to their obesity? Can we help them start to learn different activities that they may enjoy in the context of the life that they live, that they've never managed to do in the past? Can we, most importantly, help them not only cut calories, but actually improve the quality of the calories that they would like to try and, so that, can we get them to eat more fibre-rich foods? Can we get them to eat less fatty, sugary foods? There's uncertainty at the moment whether the drugs themselves help improve the quality of the diet. If they do, it's probably a very small amount. But can we capitalise on that? But can we do it in a way that isn't just saying to people you need to do this, but actually support them to do those things? That's the key.
And I guess that's my question, because without any structured behavioural scaffolding and support, how realistic is it to expect people to change? And how fair is it to expect people to take the responsibility to change? It seems to be putting a lot of pressure on the individual without that structured care.
You are completely correct, Anna. And I think at the moment, of course, the drugs are expensive. So, there's lots of issues about, widening, health inequalities and so forth, and all these issues. But imagine we're in the world, say 10 years down the line, there's a few more medications, some tablets, which are much cheaper and many more people can afford. Rather than thinking that's because my sense is some of my colleagues in certain specialities think, oh, that's taking away my work, that's, but actually that's not. I think it's the opposite. I think it's giving people, the way I described it in the paper is that these drugs, by no means perfect. They're not going to make you back to the health that you were, in the natural way. But they're giving people a little bit of a chemical shield to the environment, to give them that mental space to think about things. And what we need to do is build that scaffolding. I don't know what that scaffolding looks like, Anna, but maybe you can, my naive thought was, can we give everyone, for example, either a bot or a personal coach that says, now you've done this, have you thought about how to improve your diet in this way? And this is how you do it. Rather than, it's not enough to say to people, eat more fibre. But some people might think, well, what's fibre? Other people might think, okay, I know what they are, but how do I do it? Because they need to retrain their palates, and that takes time and effort. And we've never done that before. We've never actually taken people through that journey. Maybe we need to develop some food clubs for people on GLP-1s that gets them to try things in a group fashion. I'm just thinking aloud here. That get, that says, right, come, you're on this drug, and we're going to now think about let's trying different foods. And then once you do that, we now know from some brilliant research done by Jane Wardle, God bless her soul, in King's College, and she was able to show that kids, for example, who had an aversion to tomatoes and cucumbers, if you provide a small amount for 14 days, they can retrain their palate to start to enjoy it. Can we do that for people? So that might be, can we develop, rather than saying to people, go and make this change, we actually have to support them to do that change. And maybe we need to develop some, I'm thinking way outside the box here, some food type clinics or some physical activity types. Can we develop more walking clubs in less affluent areas? Can we develop or help people who, for example, have never had the chance to get a bike, to learn to cycle, to enjoy cycling? Can we build up the cycle lanes? Can we increase our infrastructure for more swimming classes? All these things that allows people without much conscious effort to be more physically active, to eat a bit better, because that's what we need to do. And that is a beginning of changing the food environment and the total environment we live in. Because at the moment, where we are now in 2026, in terms of what we have in terms of the environment, is substantially different to 2006, which in turn was substantially different to 1986, when the levels of obesity were 6%. And I would say to you, the environment has got progressively more and more obesogenic over the last 40 years. So we need to reverse that. We need to reverse that. And rather than, my personal optimistic view is, rather than saying these drugs are not the solution, and I don't want them to be the solution. I've said that in many places. I consult for various companies who make these drugs, but I have no shares in any of the companies. I don't want them to be the solution. I would rather we could go back to an environment that allows many more people to lead healthy lives without much conscious effort.
Is that really going to be viable to turn back the clock? I think I read somebody said somewhere, so the advent of the microwave, which was probably when that became pervasive in people's homes, that was probably early 80s, was it? Never did it become more easy to get 2,000 calories in your mouth at the push of a button. So we've over decades now, we have trained ourselves to consume in a certain way. And yes, you're right, that the environment still supports that. So I think in theory, it makes complete sense. But for an individual who is taking these medications now, what do you think the practical steps might be? Because again, back to the wraparound care that exists, from my investigations, it is very superficial diet and exercise. We all know that's really hard, even if you have the resources and the support to do that. I
think you're right, Anna. I am. The pace of technological advance has outpaced our biology. It really has. Are we ever going to go back to the 1980s? The answer is no. You're completely correct. We're not going to get rid of things like the microwave. Are food companies going to go back to the 1980s where there was virtually no fast food outlets? And it's not going to happen. But can we at least improve the environment to some degree that allows more of our children to grow up with an easier chance to be more physically active, to eat better than the current child is at the moment in the current environment? Because obesity is going up fastest in children because they're born in an obesogenic environment, which is far greater than you and I were born in, Anna. And that's a major problem. And the other group I really worry about is women of reproductive age, because clearly these drugs are not licensed for pregnancy. Who knows what they do in pregnancy? We don't want to medicalise that group of people, individuals, because of all the reproductive issues. So really, we do need to improve the environments. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the levels of obesity of 5 or 6%, but at least if we can get it down to 10 to 15% as opposed to 30%, that would be far better for society. It would also mean people were consuming less calories, perhaps less meat, which would be better for the climate. It also means planes need to carry less people who are less heavy and less fuel consumption. It would have multiple benefits for the whole of society. So maybe that's a realistic thing. But governments have to go with us. They have to make policies that maybe provide some of that infrastructure to help people lead healthy lives when they're on these medicines. And they have to supplement by giving policies that actually demands of food companies to make healthier foods and less unhealthy foods. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I don't know.
I mean, we're seeing some shifts, aren't they? I see that Marks and Spencer have launched their nutrient-dense range, for example, to try...
Which I don't like. I don't like that at all. I think that's just completely wrong. Well, what we want people to shift to is less dense calories. It's what matters in the stomach is that when you eat, you want to engage, you want to stretch some parts of your intestine, and you want to provide, you want to feel satiated, i.e. satisfied, by eating a volume of food. If you eat, right, so I've just had, for example, and I'm lucky, I'm really lucky. I've probably got reasonably good appetite genes, but I'm also reasonably, I've been endowed with a good variety of food. So I can easily eat in the evening, along with my main meal, half a plate of salad. Cucumber, tomatoes, it fills up my palate, my gut a little bit, means I eat less pasta or less chips or less something else, but I'm still getting that satiety. And also that fibre that I'm eating, we know that fibre engages some of the signals that lead to GLP-1, natural GLP-1 production better. We know that because fibre has got the best evidence for weight loss of any food nutrient. So that's what we want to do. We don't, I don't want people to have nutrient-dense foods so that being on a GLP-1, if they've cut the calorie intake by 25%, and what the last thing we want to do is Marks and Spencer's or any other company. I mean, it's not about a particular company. Is then to say, look, you can get the same volume of food for a stomach that and have another 400 calories. That's completely counterintuitive.
Is it fair to say that the durability of the outcome of anti-obesity medications has to play a role in the value of the treatments as well? Because there was the recent study that Oxford University were involved in that suggests that post-discontinuation weight gain is more rapid than for those who had lost weight based on more conventional or traditional methods. And does that then undermine the long-term cost effectiveness of GLP-1s? Because I don't think healthcare systems have calculated for people to be on these treatments for life or on and off for life.
Well, I think the healthcare system is starting to reflect or relook at that particular point. How long should people be on these drugs, and should it be for long term? Because obesity is a chronic illness for some people. It really is. And I think the World Health Organization have now accepted that based on all the evidence. So, imagine we got to a point where the drugs were £30 to £40 a month. At that point, I think it's not just about being cost effective. That's not enough anymore, because the numbers who stand to benefit, even within the current licensing of these drugs in the UK, is 15 million people. We can't afford as a nation to give 15 million people these drugs in the NHS. It simply can't, simply unaffordable. But imagine the cost came right down to about £30, £40 a month. Then at that point, I think if people bought the drugs themselves or a co-payment, I don't know, they will save about £30 to £40 on food purchasing. And so they're not out of pocket, and yet they're potentially in better health. I mean, I'm not saying that's what we want as a society, but that's kind of probably the direction of travel.
What about those people perhaps who are self-funded on these medications, who are in need of them and want to use them? Do you think if they were aware that they were perhaps committing to long-term medication, whether they would still be as motivated to make the same choice? Because it has there's a long-term pharmacological commitment as also a financial commitment.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. Look, so let me answer that and also pick up the previous point about when you stop the drugs, the weight gain is 4 times as great. The answer is, of course, it's going to be 4 times as great, because guess what? If you were to lose weight by lifestyle, you've learned a few skills, which you don't just switch off in one day. That doesn't happen. So it's a slightly artificial comparison. And I would also tell you, if I was to, if you look at the evidence, people who take these drugs, even if they take them, say, for 36 weeks, right, tirzepatide or Mounjaro, in a randomized trial that I was involved in writing up called SURMOUNT-4, the weight loss at that point was 20%. Then we randomized them people back to placebo or continuing the drug. Those who went on to placebo put weight back on, but even a year later, they were still 10% lower weight than they were at baseline. So they're still being exposed to less excess adipose tissue in various organ systems. They're still, probably mobility is a bit better. What they probably don't enjoy is putting that weight back on. So there's multiple things going on. They're their organ systems in some ways may feel better, but there's a slight caveat though, is that they're starting to fill up their organ systems again because they're starting to overeat, they're putting on weight. So I don't know how that translates, but if you have people, say for example, at the cusp of developing diabetes and they buy this drug, we know now from the evidence they can reduce the risk of developing diabetes with these drugs somewhere between 70 to 90%. So if they took this drug for 3 years and then they stopped it, they may have delayed there's a potential they could delay the diabetes for 5 years. So they still get what's known as a legacy benefit of having lower weight for a period of time on various diseases that they may be at risk of. But it's not all rosy. You're completely correct. The journey of losing weight and being satisfied and then not being able to afford and then finding, my God, my food noise has come back, I'm putting weight back on again, I'm not enjoying that, is maybe not necessarily a good journey to be on. So I don't know how we square that circle, other than the fact that hopefully the newer drugs, perhaps the tablet versions, continue to show good safety, continue to show good weight loss and good health benefits, that we will have those things that are available to people at lower cost that they can sustain for longer, and that as more people are on these drugs, that also at the same time helps change the environment in a positive direction as well. That's the big optimistic hope. I don't know if that's going to happen though.
So in, again, probably using 80s parlance, we used to talk about yo-yo dieting, didn't we? It's like, and that, from my understanding, but you might be able to enlighten me a bit on this, is also not good for your body to gain and lose weight. But that might be old data.
No. There's lots of associations when people who have variable weight changes that's linked to bad outcomes. But that's an association. Whether that's the cause of the bad outcomes or whether the yo-yoing is a reflection of something else in somebody's life, which is the cause of the bad outcomes, is never been determined. So I'm not yet convinced that that's true. What I would say though, overwhelmingly, it is pretty clear now that excess weight for more life years leads to multiple harms. And if you walk into some of our clinics and our wards, we are now seeing patients in their 80s over 100 kilograms. That didn't exist 30 years ago. And those individuals, at the point of being 80, because their joints are less efficient, because their organ systems have had many years of exposure to age and aging, they are more susceptible to the effects of obesity. Therefore, they are more likely to develop the heart failure, the kidney disease, the diabetes, the osteoarthritis, the poor mobility, and we're seeing many more people living with multiple long-term conditions. And the major modifiable risk factor, the thing that we can change in those individuals, is actually weight. We can't change the fact that they're older, which is a good thing, but it's weight is the modifiable risk for causing long-term multiple conditions. And that's a hard thing for people to accept, but that's true. It's the thing that's causing, if I do my clinic nowadays compared to 40 years ago, around about half my patients have obesity-related complications, which I didn't see 40 years ago. Because it's more people living longer with more life years with obesity, leading to more metabolic or fluid changes or hormonal changes or physical changes or mental changes linked to obesity. And that's the problem.
I think that was on the radio this morning, actually, this challenge of people living longer, which is great, but not necessarily living longer in better health. And it's closing that gap, which is the challenge all around the world.
It's almost like, if we're really honest, what do we want as a country in the future? In 2050, what do we want the country to look like? Do we want it to be full of healthier people who are more active, more fulfilled in their lives? I mean, there's so many factors that go into that. Education, obviously, but certainly, if we continue the certain obesity levels, if the environment continues to be more and more obesogenic, we are going to see more and more people at different ages. We're already seeing an epidemic of long-term multiple conditions in older age. We're starting to see an epidemic of young type 2 diabetes in younger age. We're seeing an epidemic of gestational diabetes in pregnancy. It's there.
So that's almost the dream, essentially. But at a sort of a practical day-to-day level, obviously as a behavioural scientist, I see some interesting interventions that have been tested. I think, so I live in Cambridge. I know Cambridge University did a study experimenting with the size of wine glasses in a couple of bars here. And surprise, surprise, smaller glasses means that people drink less over the course of their meal. Now, then there's competing forces, because for the person running the bar, they obviously want the bigger wine glasses. So there are some things that, in terms of smaller tweaks we could make to an environment, which, whether they'd have sufficient impact at scale, who knows? But there's some interesting learnings there. I'm wondering, again, going back to your role as a treating physician, what are the smaller changes do you think that could have an impact at an individual level? Whether it's, I don't know, hiding the biscuit tin at the back of the cupboard, little tweaks. Have you seen any interventions? I've
actually had colleagues who've developed some of these things, like, not necessarily hiding, but locking things up in a particular environment. I think, if from my view, being brutally honest, where we are now in terms of the environment is so drastically changed that any small single thing, on its own has a minuscule, negligible impact. Even the sugar tax, it's not reversed obesity, because it's far too small on its own. It's tiny. Many people are continuing to drink high sugary drinks. Some people have now, started to drink a bit more diet, which is good, but it's had a trivial effect, really. We need to make multiple changes, the kind of things you've described, to really reverse the improve the environment. In terms of small changes, I don't think that's happening. I think we really need to think way outside the box, and we need to have food companies be prepared to make less profit. It cannot be always about the shareholder, because that is the thing. I'm not having a go at people who are getting rich, but getting rich becomes addictive. And corporate responsibility becomes difficult for them to manage when the bottom line is the dollar or the pound. If that's what they want, then they're going to continue to find ways to maximise profit. If that happens to be at leading to bad health, that shareholders don't see that. And it all comes down to economics, profiteering, and imagining a world where we take everyone and make it a level playing field. So we say to all food companies, here are the rules that you have to play with. Yes, some of you will make less profit, but it doesn't matter. That's the rules. Because we need to make an environment which is healthier for the nation, not just for us, but for the people you're working in your company, your children, your children's children, so that the UK as a nation moves forward in a positive direction.
Yes, and I'd have to agree with you with that. I think we've agreed on a lot of things, but it's been a really fascinating conversation for me. But it's something, as I say, from a behavioural science perspective, we've been questioning for quite a long time in terms of the what comes next, because it seems to, as I say, it's important, but perhaps at this point in time overlooked.
Yeah, no, you're completely correct. And, these drugs, let me put this clear, they have substantial benefits in multiple things, but for some individuals, they may not, they may still be benefits, but they might get to a point where they have their skin or the way they look on their drugs isn't as what they would want, because they had put on a lot of weight. And when you lose that weight, perhaps, and others, they might be, skin flaps and other things. So these drugs do not take you back completely to what you were if you get to very high levels of obesity. So hopefully the hope is there's a range of drugs which are much cheaper with good continued safety, good continued benefit that people can use early to stop them getting to the stages where the benefits of the drugs are tarnished by some of the other issues that rapid weight loss leads to. Changes in the skin, maybe gallstones, maybe other things. I have no idea. So it's not all rosy, but the benefits at this moment in the vast majority of people, particularly those at risk, outweigh the risks. And I think that's, if we didn't have these innovations, I'd be worried about society at the moment.
We'd be in a much worse position. Absolutely.
We would be in a worse position, I think.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really fascinating, and I really appreciate the time.
Absolute pleasure.
Great talking to you.
Likewise.
So thank you for tuning in to the Big Picture podcast, and keep your ears out for the next episode.